Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Notes by Alex. It looks like we made it through the first 2 months of 2021. Congratulations, everyone. Big round of applause. Okay, so a 2-month wrap-up video for January and February. Who does this guy think he is? Why am I doing this? I started the channel at the beginning of February. And by the time I did the BookTube newbie tag, I figured by the second week of February, people wouldn't watch wrap-ups anymore. And then I saw people doing it anyways. People were releasing wrap-ups until the end of February for January. So overthinking, anxiety, you win again. I will summarize each book without spoiling it. I'll try to keep summaries and recommendations or thoughts fairly brief so this doesn't run too long. Having said that, I feel like lots of booktubers read more in a week than I read in 2 months. So I think we'll be fine for video length. I have a couple physical copies just stacked on the floor next to me. So I will hold those up if that's what I read. But I did quite a few of these books. I read lots of them on my e-reader. So I will just put a picture of the cover somewhere in the video if that's the case. Quick spoiler-free summaries. Quick thoughts on the book. Speed through this. I'm ready. You're ready. Hopefully everyone's ready. Don't click away yet. The first book I read in 2021 at the very start of January was The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. It's kind of even hard to summarize this book. It's a comedy book. It was originally a radio drama, I believe, and then they adapted it into a book, which is kind of interesting. The main character survives Earth being destroyed by aliens for purposes of making basically a space highway there, and he gets taken onto a ship, and it goes from there, and the plot just gets ridiculous. The plot doesn't even really matter. It's just comedy all throughout. The first thing I'll say about this book is that if you are at all interested in reading it, try to read it as soon as you can without getting any spoilers. I liked the book. I liked it quite a bit, but there's a specific part in the book that is so commonly quoted that it's becoming like meme status. And I already knew about this part of the book. This particular part of the book, which I won't say, if you've read the book, you probably know what I'm talking about. If you haven't read the book, go read it. It probably would have been one of the highlights, if not the highlight of the book, if I didn't already know it was coming. With that in mind, the book would probably be hilarious to someone who doesn't know anything about it. To me, it was very funny, which is not a big difference. I think it's very hard to make people laugh just through writing alone. Maybe some people laugh easier than others. I find it's hard for me to laugh just at writing. And this book made me laugh out loud several times. It's very impressive. It's still funny. Definitely recommended. Okay, so I started 2021 with a comedy, and then I went straight into complete misery. I read The Elementary Particles by Michel Houellebecq. I hope I pronounced that okay. I'm going to admit something very embarrassing. Until I heard someone say that name out loud, I pronounced his last name Houellebecq, which is not French or any language. Houellebecq. Sounds like Hoobastank. The Elementary Particles. I believe it was published under the name Atomized in the UK. Houellebecq's a fairly controversial writer. I had not read anything by him, but I guess he's pretty outspoken with some somewhat controversial views. I've heard some criticism of this book that it's kind of misogynistic. So I was ready for something truly offensive. I was gearing up for that. I didn't really get that, to be honest. I mean, okay. One of the main characters of this book is misogynistic. And if you have triggers surrounding the internal monologue of a man talking about women in a very objectified way, I would say don't read this. But he's not supposed to be admired. He's a miserable loser. I'll do a very quick summary. This book follows two half-brothers. One is named Bruno. In his adult life, he's a womanizer. He thinks of women as, well, he objectifies them quite a bit. He wants to have as much sex as possible. His half-brother Michel is the opposite. He's a brilliant scientist, and he's fairly asexual and aromantic. He has a hard time connecting with anybody. And the book just follows their lives, really. That's all of it. Along the way, there are some commentaries on life, modern life specifically. I get a sense that the author has some fairly conservative views about sexuality. A lot of this book has commentaries on hypersexuality and, just like sleeping around, I guess, and how that affects people. And if I had to guess the author's intentions, I think he's probably against that. To me, that in and of itself is not a very offensive view. Like, some people are okay with, doing whatever you want with your sexuality. Some people are more reserved. Live your life. Bruno, I could see how people think he's an offensive character, but again, he's not to be admired. He's a total loser. And his past is explained in great detail, and he had a miserable childhood, and he's just a very sad being. you get a sense of why he is the way he is. And it's sad. It doesn't excuse his behavior, but yeah, I guess I can't say much more than that without spoiling it. I would say I did enjoy this book. Again, it's pretty miserable. It's pretty depressing. But there's lots about this book that kept me thinking about it after I was finished. So it was thought-provoking more than anything, and it uses some fairly explicit sexuality in the book to get some points across. So if you have issues with reading stuff like that, then, steer clear. But yeah, I don't know. I thought it was very good. It was good, and I will read more from him. The next book I read in January was Cannery Row. Can you see that? Yeah. Cannery Row by John Steinbeck. This was great. This was really, really good. Before I talk about the book, let me rant really quickly. Classic books and introductions added afterwards. What is the point of those? Maybe this is foolish of me to have read it or try to read it, because afterwards I saw people online being like, oh yeah, never read those. This has happened three times with books, I think, where they add an introduction by some scholar who, I guess the introduction is supposed to explain the author's life and how they came up with the classic story within the book, but they spoil everything. It's like they put it at the beginning of the book, and there is definitely no reason you should read these introductions before you've read the book. It just ruins things. So I was reading the introduction, and I got to some severe spoilers within the first 2 pages, and I closed it and just started reading the rest of the book. And I didn't go back and read the introduction afterwards out of spite. This is the first John Steinbeck I've read in my adult life. We read Of Mice and Men in, I think, the 8th or 9th grade. And in middle school, high school grade, there was a point in time where I kind of fell out of reading too much. And I remember reading that book with the class. We read the first chapter. And after we finished, I remember thinking, wow, this might be the first book I read for school in a while that I'm actually going to really like. And then someone in my class, right after we finished the first chapter, just shouted out the ending of the book. He's actually a buddy of mine now. Cameron, on the off chance that you are watching this, I love you, but I also hate you. And always will. Anyways, Cannery Row. This book is about a little seaside town in California. There's a street in this town in which there's lots of canneries. Fishermen will bring their fish to the cannery so they can can tuna, etc. Other fish that get canned. Who eats canned fish besides tuna? Are there other things that go in cans? I've seen smoked oysters, I guess. This doesn't matter. There is an overarching plotline to the book, but it's mostly just kind of a pastiche of all these characters within this town. It'll be explaining the actual story of the book, and the next chapter will just cut away to a little short story, basically, about some other people in the town and their lives. And all the characters in this book are amazingly realized. They all feel like real, authentic human beings with quirks and eccentricities. That's a hard word to say. And yeah, it just gives you the sense of this small town in California, that of all these weirdos who all interact with each other and, get into fights and whatnot, but also help each other. There's something very beautiful about it. It gave me faith in humanity. It's also sad at times, but yeah, definitely recommended. It's super quick as well. The next book I read was Notes from Underground by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Can you see it? Can you see it? Can you see it? Can you see the cover? Can you see it? I have this Penguin Classics version of Notes from Underground and the double. I just read Notes from Underground. It's the first Dostoevsky I've ever read. I really want to read The Brothers Karamazov by him, and I've heard it's great. It's very long. It's intimidating. I'm hoping to get to it at some point in 2021. We'll see how that goes, but I figured this was a good starting point because it's very short. I think it was 110 pages. Honestly, if it's any indication of how The Brothers Karamazov is written, then I feel like that book's going to take me a very long time. Even though this book's only 110 pages, something like that, it was very dense to me. The writing style, you really have to pick through it and kind of reread passages to get a sense of what he's getting at. I've just looked some stuff up online afterwards, and it seems like lots of people agree that Notes from Underground is very dense in comparison to some of his other books. Not a criticism of Notes from Underground, though. Really great book. I enjoyed it a lot. The book is split into 2 parts, and it's narrated by the underground man. He's unnamed. He's a guy living in Russia in the 1800s, and he's a very spiteful man by his own admission. He's just furious with society. He hates society and people, and he's just kind of bitter. The book's split into 2 parts. The first part is kind of just like a long essay about his thoughts on the world and society. And then in the second part, he recounts just a brief story of something that happened in his life recently. There's something amazing about this book in how it was written in 1864, I believe. That's a long, long time ago. And a lot of the things that he says feel accurate to today as well. I mean, I don't think you're supposed to read the book and agree with him 100% and be like, yeah, that's what life's like. It's terrible. But there's lots of things that you empathize with in his points of view. The book does a very good job of presenting this very flawed character and having you go empathize with why he's like that and even agree with him in some cases. There's lots of little quirks to his personality where it's just like, this guy's just miserable. Like, I'm not like that at all, but I know people like that. And then there's also points where you kind of agree with him and you're like, am I a loser? Which for me, like the answer is yes, but kind of a surprisingly challenging read in my opinion. It took longer than some of the other books in this list, despite being very short. But I think I'm probably going to reread it again someday, maybe sooner rather than later. I think that there's lots of meaning to be taken from it, so definitely worth checking out. Then I read A Moveable Feast by Ernest Hemingway. Oh, so good. I loved it. Love Hemingway. He is not a perfect author. He's not a perfect writer. He's definitely not a perfect man. I know he was kind of a jerk, but there's something about his writing that I just really like. This is a journalistic account of his time in Paris. He lived in Paris in the 1920s as a young man and a writer trying to make it big and become accomplished with his first wife as well. And it's just his account of their time together. It was written very late in his life. It was published posthumously, which, by the way, there are apparently 2 editions of this book. One of them released fairly recently. I'm going to put both of them up on the screen. Apparently, this one is the one to not read first. This copy over here was re-released and re-edited by, I believe, one of Hemingway's grandsons, and he adds a lot of interesting little sections that were cut, but apparently he also changes some things. I don't know. Some people get really worked up over it. I'd like to read this copy eventually, but go with this one to start with. Hemingway, his writing style has been adored and criticized by many different people. I think one of his strengths is that he's very good at giving you a sense of place. He writes about Paris in this book with such love that you can just feel it coming off the pages. He paints this scene of Paris in the 1920s, and it makes you feel nostalgic for a time and a place that you were never in. So that's very impressive to me. Because this is a first-hand account from him about his time, you do get a sense that he was kind of misogynistic. So just be ready for that, I guess. The thing is, I don't think there's anything wrong with reading this book at all. I think you just have to take some of his viewpoints in it with a grain of salt. You should not be idolizing this man for everything he ever did. There's a few chapters where he recounts his relationship with the Fitzgeralds, F. Scott Fitzgerald and Zelda. Those are definitely a highlight. I would say a good word to describe most of this book is just pleasant. It's just a breezy read. It's nice to read about his time in Paris. It's interesting. But then this is the second Hemingway book where there's one passage where I just go, oh, and it hits you emotionally. Yeah, recommended. Liked it. Then I read The Road by Cormac McCarthy. I'm very sick of talking about this book. I have a recommendation video on this channel. I'll maybe link to it somewhere, but go watch that. I'll talk about it in depth without spoiling it as much as I can. The very short version of it for this video is that I recommend it. It was probably my favorite of January. So just, yeah, go read it. Then I read Frank Miller's Ronin. This is a graphic novel. It was gifted to me by my dear brother for Christmas in 2019, and I just never got around to reading it. I don't know why. It looked very cool. It just took me a while to actually get to it. And it was okay. I don't really have much to say about this one. There's parts of it that I thought were really cool and obviously very influential given the time in which this was published, which I'll put on the screen. I don't remember the year, but it was obviously very influential to lots of popular fiction and popular stories. So props to that. The art is also really nice. There's a couple panels where it just made me sit and stare at it and go, wow. But there are parts of the story as well that are just a bit silly. I don't know. If you're like a big fan of Frank Miller or you're a big fan of comic history, I would say it's definitely worth checking out. But if you're looking for just getting into graphic novels, this isn't the one to start with. There's more memorable books out there. And that's everything I read in January. The first book I started in February is Masters of Doom. What's the full title? Oh my God, let me look it up. Masters of Doom, How Two Guys Created an Empire and Transformed Pop Culture by David Kushner. It's the first book I started in February. I did not finish it. I might still go back and finish it. It's just taking a long time. So if you are an epic gamer like me, you know what Doom is. It was a supremely popular game in the 90s. There are many video games that just would not exist without it. And it was created by a small group of guys in their late teens and early 20s. So this book is just about how they made the game, why the technology was so progressive at the time, and how it changed pop culture, and how they made millions and millions of dollars from it. I thought this was going to be very interesting because I know there are parts of the original Doom game that were like game changing. Puns. There are bits of technology in the original Doom that changed video games forever. And I was really excited to learn more about how this 19-year-old guy, John Carmack, did that at the time. And that is a very, very small part of this book. This book spends way too much time focusing on how much the Doom creators love video games and love playing video games, and how much flippin' pizza they eat. Every paragraph, there is a section explaining how they program these games in a little office rented out of a basement of a house, and how it was all these computers that they're coding at, and the room was just scattered with empty pizza boxes and cans of Diet Coke. It's like, I get it. They were teenagers. They ate lots of pizza. I don't know. I think the point of it, like the author's trying to make this juxtaposition between how influential and impressive this game is with these teenagers and how they're still just kids who love D&D and pizza and video games. But it's like, yeah, we know that. If you picked up this book, you already know that they were these really young guys who made this game. So I don't know why you have to talk about the pizza boxes so much. It gets to the point where they make Doom and they make millions of dollars, and then it focuses on the cars they drive. And it's just like, yeah, they made lots of money. They're 20 and they spent money on cars. Like, I wanted to know how they made Doom. And it's like a couple paragraphs, it felt like. I still will maybe finish it at some point. Honestly, I don't care right now. We'll see. In the March wrap up, I'll tell you whether I actually went back and finished it. The second book I picked up in February was Catch-22 by Joseph Heller, one of the greatest novels of all time, the quintessential war novel, one of the funniest, greatest works of comedy in the world. I didn't like this book at all. Okay, that's an exaggeration. There are parts of this book that I thought were very, very impressive. I've heard people say that it takes a while to get into, and to wait until about chapter 12 and it starts to get better. And chapter 13 was the highlight. That's how they trick you. I wasn't into it really. And then the 13th chapter, I was like, wow, this is going to be awesome. And then it doesn't get as good as that ever again. There are bits and pieces of very funny writing and also very sad writing in this book. So it is pointing out the ridiculousness of war, and it does that with comedy and with very, very sad, beautiful passages. It just seemed overlong for that to me. There are jokes in this book that are kind of funny. You read it and you're like, yeah, that's funny. And then they repeat it, and then they repeat it, and it doesn't build to anything else. They just keep repeating all these silly jokes. And like Shakespeare once said, brevity is the soul of wit. And what he meant by that is just shut your stupid mouth. It's really easy to ruin comedy if you drag it out. And to me, this felt dragged out. Sorry to anyone who's a really big fan of the book. It just wasn't for me. Yeah, I don't know. Sorry. So yeah, February was not off to a very good start. I had a hard time continuing reading. You lose the motivation when you're on a couple books that you're just not into. Then I read Swimming in the Dark by Tomasz Jedrowski. Sorry about the pronunciation. This book was awesome. I have a recommendation video coming up for this one because I really, really liked it. I don't want to say too much about it because I'm going to have a more in-depth video about this one, but it is a love story between two young men set in communist Poland in the 80s. If that sounds interesting to you, the book is great. Please go read it. I read The Prophet by Kahlil Gibran. This is a very short story. It's maybe 100 pages, and I didn't know much about it going into it. I knew it was one of the most insanely popular stories of all time. It's in the public domain, so if you have an e-reader, you can go find it very quickly and easily. It's a very short story with lots of passages from this prophet, a speaker who is giving his thoughts on many topics in life. Love, family, work, kindness, I don't know. It's very poetic prose. There's lots of really beautiful, profound passages. I wound up highlighting a lot of them on my e-reader, and then the copy that I got from my e-reader made it crash, so I had to delete it. But I found another copy that is working better, and I'm going to reread it again because it's something you can fly through, and there's so many quotes that feel very meaningful today, even though this was written a very long time ago. So recommend it for sure. The last book I read in February was I Am Legend by Richard Matheson. This is about a man who is boarded up in his house when the rest of the world have become vampires. The movie is kind of silly, but it's a guilty pleasure for me. I actually like it quite a bit. And I've wanted to read this one for a while because I've heard it's a, classic horror novel. It's a classic vampire story. And I've heard it's, way better than the movie. It's definitely better than the movie. I don't know what to say about this one. If you're a fan of vampires and horror fiction, this is a classic. I would say it's worth reading. If you've seen the movie and you want to try the book, there's enough about it that's different that you will get lots out of the book still. And even for myself, I actually already knew how this book ends, and I knew how it's different from the movie, and I still got lots out of it. It is tense at times. It's emotional at times. There's one thing that bothered me about the book, and I guess I'll say it. I get worked up like unreasonably when authors will describe a character way too late in the book. He kind of gives a rough description of the main character, how he looks, and you get it in your head. And then like 2/3 through the book, he mentions the main character's blonde. And I'm like, well, now I don't know what to believe. If you're going to describe your main character and not leave it up to the reader's imagination, put it near the beginning of your book. The other thing is he takes a really long time to explain that the vampires in this book have powers of hypnotism. But like, okay, how do I put this? So the main character of this book, Robert Neville, goes out during the daytime where vampires can't go out in the daytime. They burn up in the sun. And then at nighttime, he boards up his house. And the vampires sit outside his house and they try to coerce him into coming out because they can't get into his building. It's too secure. The women vampire do this by stripping naked on his lawn and like trying to convince him to come outside. And he really grapples with it. He's like, oh, I want to go outside, but I won't do it. And a lot of the beginning of the book is explaining that. And I was reading this. I was like, dude, you got to chill. Like, you're going to die. Just relax, pal. Relax. And then like, again, like 2/3 into the book, they're like, oh, he's grappling with this because they have powers of hypnotism. It's like, well, you made him look like a moron. Like, he's a heterosexual male, but like, you're not going to go outside to a naked woman who's going to rip you apart. Like, oh my gosh. It was so stupid. Okay. That's not selling you on the book. The book's really good. It was just, I thought this was so silly. Maybe I missed something, but it was so silly. The rest of the book's great. Let's get serious. Yeah. Recommended. I started Child 44 by Tom Rob Smith. This is a thriller book about a secret agent in communist Russia. A coworker gave this to me to read after he heard I really liked the communist Poland historical aspect of Swimming in the Dark. And he's like, you got to read this. It's really interesting. I have to work up the motivation myself to read something. So when someone's like, read this as soon as you can and like loans it to you, it's like, well, I might be borrowing this for a long time. So I kind of forced myself to start it, but I'm really enjoying it so far. So it'll be in a March wrap up and I'll let you know how it goes. We did it. January and February. That's everything I read. Weird start to the year, I guess. I don't know. How are you guys all doing? Everyone's okay? Did you guys hear that Daft Punk retired? Like, man, 2020 was such a whack year and it feels like it's still being sad. It's like, okay, dude, stop. 2020's over. Stop. I don't get sad about bands breaking up and stuff like that very often, but Daft Punk hit me emotionally. I've been a big fan for a while now. I remember Alive 2007, their live tour, which is like groundbreaking. That happened when I was in the 8th grade. And I remember scouring the internet for terrible camera footage of the event because there's no official live DVD of it or anything like that. I remember just trying to find bits and pieces of parts of their set. Just like, I want to go to this so bad, which for all you Zoomers out there, people used to bring physical cameras, like video cameras, to concerts instead of their phone. And they'd take videos of it. And that video was worse than phone footage now. And we loved it. But yeah, Daft Punk was probably the only musical group or band or artist where I've told myself, I will pay any amount of money and travel anywhere to go see them live. And they haven't performed live in a very long time. And now they've retired. So I won't be able to. I guess the silver lining is that they had a very impressive career, and they never really put out bad music or got too famous, or, well, they got very famous, but like everything by them is impressive. So they ended it on a high note. So I wish them the best of luck, I guess. This isn't even about books anymore. Thank you so much for watching. If you made it to this point, the next wrap up video will be shorter because it'll just be March. Tell me what you thought of these books. If you agreed with me, if you disagreed, tell me if you're as sad as I am about Daft Punk breaking up. No, not breaking up. They retired. They're still best friends. I know that. I hope you all have great days and great marches. See you soon. Thank you. Bye.